Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second session for this morning at the convention. My name is Nasham Portrag, Head of Funds at Work and Distribution at Momentum Corporate, one of the chairs for today. I'm also joined by my co-chair, Lindsay Schutters. Lindsay is a distinguished business journalist, editor, and storyteller in South Africa. He's also currently serving as a business journalist at the Daily Maverick. Over to you, Lindsay, to introduce our speakers and the topic for the session.
Good morning, everybody. I'm hoping that everyone had a great start to the day. And for the pleasure of you guys being here so early, you get a very long refreshment break after this. But right now, it's the actuarial valuation of living annuities related to maintenance and accrual in divorce and deceased estate contexts by Eddie Theron. So putting a price tag on living annuity is in the middle of a divorce or when settling an estate is notoriously difficult. So this explores why it's so challenging, mostly because the product has a messy hybrid nature, being both a legal document and a financial asset. And Eddie's proposing a new framework that starts by asking what was the original intention of the policy and what is the person truly entitled to. Eddie Theron.
Thank you for that introduction and good morning, everyone. So, if people could hide their retirement savings in a place where their spouse could not reach it in a divorce, would they do it? Yes? No? Well, that's exactly what Emilio Montanari tried to do. He retired and he converted his pension and provident funds into a living annuity. And by doing so, he contended that because it is in a living annuity, it does not form part of his estate for accrual purposes and therefore should not be valued at all. And for a while, the courts agreed. The High Court agreed, the full court agreed, until the Supreme Court of Appeal stepped in and said, the capital belongs to the insurer, but the right to future income is an asset in his estate. So that settled one question, but it opens a completely new question. It's now not so much understanding that it is the right to income that needs to be valued, but it is now asking which income is right to value. So before we go back to the Montanari case, let's just have a look at the accrual system, the rule that Mr. Montanari tried to bend. In South Africa, if you are married out of community of property with accrual, each spouse has a separate estate during marriage, and then at divorce, the spouse with a smaller accrual has a claim against the other spouse with the larger accrual. So let's look at some simple numbers to put that into context. So let's assume Mr. and Mrs. had nothing when they got married. When they were thinking about a divorce, Mr. had accumulated 5 million in a retirement fund and 5 million in cash. So now, when they get divorced, what is supposed to happen is that their estates should be equalized. And what is interesting here, because in this example it is a retirement fund, the Pension Fund Act has introduced the concept of pension interest, and that actually allows the retirement fund to be split. So in this example, one could get to the point where you split both of the assets, the cash and the retirement annuity. So let's turn back to Mr. Montanari. As I said, he had accumulated retirement savings, and then, by converting it to a living annuity, he contended that it magically disappears. And that, according to him, the accrual to his wife is only 2.5 million, where, if you think about it from a fairness point of view, it should really be 5 million. Mrs. Montanari, of course, objected And she said, well, surely there must be a value in the income stream, and surely that must be valued. Firstly, as I said, the High Court didn't agree with her. The High Court agreed with Mr. Montanari, arguing that the capital belongs to the insurer and not to him, and therefore should not be in his estate for accrual purposes. But eventually, the Supreme Court of Appeal overturned those decisions and ruled that the capital belongs to the insurer, but the right to the future income is an asset in his estate. And this brings us to the big question now. Again, not whether to value the income right, but what income is right to value. Because each income or withdrawal rate, as we know, living annuities, you've got an option of withdrawal rates between 2.5% and 17.5%. So the question is now, which one of those withdrawal rates is the right one to value? Because each one paints a different picture when it comes to income and inheritance. So let's look at the income side of things first. So on this chart, we see the projected gross monthly income streams using capital of 5 million in a living annuity. And we first look at the 4 fixed income streams, 2.5%, 5%, 2.5%, 5%, 10%, and 17.5%. Then the interesting one, the yellow one, is calculated as a fixed starting rand amount of 5% that then increases with inflation over the lifetime. And this is where, in my experience in doing financial advice work as well, where I see that very few clients and actually quite a few financial advisors don't really understand the mechanics of a living annuity. When people talk about the fear of running out of money, it's not so much that they are going to run out of capital, but it is that this income pattern is going to breach the 17.5% cap and therefore start reducing. It's not so much running out of capital, but it's about that income benefit, or that income reducing. So one can then go and project the nominal death benefits under the same scenarios, and as you would expect, under low withdrawal rates, you see that the death benefit increasing, and at higher withdrawal rates, capital starts to deplete quite quickly. It's then relatively straightforward to go and put an expected present value on each one of those. So firstly, in the blue bars, to project the income forward, apply mortality and discount, and come to that expected present value of the future income stream. In blue, you can do the same for the gold, the expected death benefit, and then you can do the same for calculating tax, both for income tax and for the tax that's payable on death. But of course, this still does not answer the question which one is right and which one is fair. Another point I want to make here is that I wonder, again, in speaking to real-life living annuitants, how many of them understand that if they choose a fairly safe withdrawal rate of around 5%, initial increasing with inflation, I wonder if they understand that less than half of their capital effectively ends up as an income benefit. And I wonder if they started their retirement saving journey with the intention that they would want higher income for life as opposed to more inheritance. So, what I'm proposing is that one can look at a framework and one can identify anchors or reference points that gives language to different withdrawal rates. That is not just a number, but that explains what it means so that people can understand it. And one can then value those reference points and then have a conversation around intention and entitlement. So what are these 4 reference points that we propose? Firstly, the maximum inheritance withdrawal rate. This is actually not a new withdrawal rate. It is just the minimum 2.5% withdrawal rate. In terms of intention, this would be an annuitant that wants to preserve capital for inheritance, and income is almost incidental. Maybe he has other income sources or another reason why he doesn't need more income. For the next anchors, I'll just introduce the concept of probability of survival. So on this chart for male age 65, we can see the total life expectancy is around 77 years. The next anchor point is then the inflation increases forever withdrawal rate. And this would probably be what annuitants start out thinking when they start saving for retirement. They would like an income that increases with inflation forever. It can be seen as a safe income, and it protects against extreme longevity. And by calculating it, we can see that for this example, it comes out at 4.3% starting withdrawal rate. The next one is then the inflation increases to life expectancy withdrawal rate. And here we consider a fairness approach and say, what is the maximum income that will increase with inflation, but then then breach the cap at the statistical life expectancy, and then start to reduce from there. And this is aligned to a typical concept that we come across in valuation work, which is saying we take into account average life expectancy as opposed to taking into account tail end survival probabilities. So in this case, the inflation increases to life expectancy withdrawal rate comes out at 7.8%. And then we can define a concept called the maximum income life annuity, and we can ask the question, if the annuitant had to convert the life annuity the living annuity to a life annuity, what is the maximum starting percentage of income that you could start receiving that increases with inflation for life? And this anchor point represents maximum income for life with no inheritance. Of course, there are options for life annuities where you can build in some form of inheritance, but for the purposes of this presentation, we assume that there's no inheritance under this option. We can then go and project the nominal death benefits for each one of those, and then go and value it in the same way like we did before. And as expected, one can see that at lower withdrawal rates, again, the income is lower and the opposite way around. This still does not really help us with the answer. So we've now given language to all these reference points. We can explain it. We can see that it's a bit different to just saying 2% or 5% or 10%, but it still really doesn't help us to come to an answer. And this is where the idea of intention and entitlement and the context of the particular scenario comes into play. So let's try and explain this by going back to the Montanari scenario. So here we were talking about an accrual claim that arises from divorce. And if we think about intention, Mr. Montanari probably argues that he would want inflation increases for life. So he would want to see a valuation done on that withdrawal rate of 4.3%. And by the blue bar, we can see that that is fairly low in terms of percentage of the total 5 million. The context of this is estate equalization. And then we have to ask the question, well, who is entitled to that death benefit? Is it his beneficiaries that he's nominating? Is it his estate if there's no beneficiaries nominated? Or is it his wife? And I would contend that if you think about if it wasn't a living annuity and just cash, surely the wife is entitled to half of that cash. He might want to say in his will that some of that cash should go to his children, but his wife has got the first claim on the cash. So similarly for the living annuity, his wife should have the first claim on the death benefit, shouldn't she? So if one follows that line of thinking, then one probably lean towards the withdrawal rates that maximizes income and minimizes inheritance, like the 17.5% withdrawal rate or the maximum income life annuity withdrawal rate. There are, of course, other contexts, like maintenance claims against deceased estates, maintenance obligations in divorce, and the contention is that each one of these needs to be considered before one can really decide on which withdrawal rate is the one to value. As I come into a land, I quite like the theme of beyond the numbers for this convention, and it speaks to the heart of the presentation and the paper that I wrote. And some of the wider implications that I talk about in the paper is firstly to think about how this concept of the value of a living annuity extends to the pre-retirement space. Interestingly, in the last month, there's been another judgment that pretty much, I think, is going to lead us to value all retirement funds not only as pension interest, like I mentioned earlier, but also along the same thinking of projecting an income forward, because that judgment also mentions that taxation needs to be taken into account for retirement funds in accrual claims. Another implication or question that I have is if legislation and regulation and product design make it possible for the concept of pension interest to be around and for that interest to be split, why can't living annuities be split? And wouldn't that make many disputes a lot easier to resolve? Then from a financial advice point of view, my opinion is that living annuities are not very well understood. My opinion is that because there's a mix of this income and inheritance, one often mix the two up together and you get outcomes that is not optimal for either of them. So the work that one can, as actuaries, we can do is to try and bring this concept home that it might be more beneficial and easier to understand, and there might even be a psychological advantage to it if the income benefit in terms of retirement and the death benefit can be separated from the start of the savings journey so that one can then also invest them differently and think about them differently. So the purpose of the presentation and the paper was really to empower actuaries, legal practitioners and fiduciaries towards a way to value living annuities in a way that is fair and defensible. And we suggest doing that by firstly defining a framework with reference points, calibrating those anchors, doing the calculations to come up with the withdrawal rates. It gives us language to then explain what they actually mean. And once we can do that, we can go and value the income benefit and the death benefit for each one of those. We can then look at the context of the particular situation. And then once we've reasoned entitlement and intention, we can select a withdrawal rate, and that then becomes the value of the living annuity in that particular instance. Thank you.
There is a roving mic if there are any questions. Up front here, and then one at the back there, and one over there.
It's Jonathan Moore speaking. My point is just to, if you must remember with the accrual system, you can exclude an asset or you can declare value. And if you want to exclude assets, like I exclude my stamp collection, you can effectively thwart the whole point of the accrual by buying valuable stamps. So the point of the accrual is to make sure that is to find a mechanism to share the assets acquired as a result of the earnings of both parties or gains during both parties during the marriage. So I agree with your hypothesis that you should take account of effectively the death benefit, because that is something over which the living annuitant actually has some measure of control. For me personally, and not because I'm not an actuary probably, I think it's just simpler just to incorporate the capital value, because remember, it's only a claim. It's not a right to the particular asset. And it's what you have to work out in interest of fairness. So, because it does get very complicated, looking at trying, and I know that's what the court said, but I much prefer things to be much simpler. That's my only point.
Thank you. Yeah, good point, and point taken. I guess where I get to in my thinking is if you think about the accrual situation, if it wasn't a living annuity, let's say it was a unit trust. According to the Act, one needs to take taxation into account. So if you've got R1 million in a unit trust and you're going to pay capital gains tax on that R1 million, there's only 900,000 Rand at the end that's going to be splittable. So by taking the capital value of the living annuity, you are at the very least not taking taxation into account, which should be taken into account.
Cool. Up front here. Yeah.
Thanks. Warren Matheson. I guess it's a similar point to Jonathan's in that it seems obvious to me that you mentioned, like if you separate the benefit out into income and a death benefit, the present value of those benefits is equal to the value of the capital in the living annuity at any point in time. So that should be your starting. Sorry, I'm mentioning the capital value at the beginning or at any point in time. That is the reference point for the value of the asset that actually being disputed. And I was going to ask about the issue around taxation, which you've sort of highlighted. So the only it seems to me that the exercise boils down to determining the after tax impact of the benefit that has to be split. And maybe that's something that I missed because
that's a good point, and I agree to an extent. What makes it tricky is the fact that the court said it's the income right that needs to be valued. So what I'm trying to show is what happens if you value just the income right. It could be more fair to say one shouldn't just take the income right into account. You should also take the death benefit into the death benefit into account. And if you arrive at that point and say, well, let's value them together, then you don't have the split of the blue and the orange. You've just got one value that's effectively the capital less tax. And as I explained in the divorce accrual example, the death benefit should really be attributable to the wife. So whether you say the benefit is the income benefit plus the death benefit that goes to her, or whether you say, well, you're just going to value the income as if there is no benefit by choosing a high withdrawal rate, you more or less get to the same thing. It's just about how to explain that to the legal profession and help them to arrive at a fair valuation.
Yeah, but I mean, so I guess a suggestion would be that the fair valuation relates to the accrual of maybe income generating assets over, I don't know, leave it to Jonathan to argue the legal points, but because it seems like an interesting way to determine that you should just be splitting the capital because that's what's accrued under the accrual system, the value to future benefits, which is equal to the capital. Thanks.
Just one up front here. And then we'll try and come there. There are 5 minutes.
Okay, now thanks. Conrad here. Interesting framework you got for the different income streams. The one thought I just had, all of it is almost initial intention. It is like up front you're saying you want to this much income, but living annuities almost have this flexibility that you can change as different needs arrive. So if in year 3 or 4 your car gets crashed or you need to buy a home in a certain year, you might withdraw more. So choosing a lower income drawdown rate initially doesn't mean necessarily it will automatically translate in a higher death benefit. Or what it might just be that you want to defer some of your income. Or what. So what's your thoughts around those scenarios? Is my question.
Yeah, great point, and that's the whole complexity and why it makes it difficult to place a value on it, because the withdrawal rate percentage we choose at the start is not necessarily, and in most cases definitely not the percentage that remains throughout life. So that's one of the challenges and complexities in valuing this, and I don't think there's a way that one can take that type of modelling into account. You don't know what people will do and when they need to change their spending habits. But it's a good point. It comes to the heart of the question or the problem of why it's difficult to value these things.
Cool. Up front here.
Thank you. Interesting presentation. I share most of your thoughts. I've got a question. I'm not convinced about the entitlement to a death benefit. I'm not disagreeing here. I'm just not convinced. Mm-hmm. If you take a scenario, let's say the Montanari case, there was not a living annuity. Mr. Montanari had terminal cancer. He had a whole life policy with a 10 million rand benefit, which would have resulted in a death benefit in the near future. Would you treat the entitlement to that death benefit in a similar way under accrual, under a life policy? Because in theory, I know legally it's different contracts, but in theory, in essence, it's the same, the concept of a death benefit. So what would your thoughts be around that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess in that case, there's not a. It's not a question of who it goes to, whether it goes to the children or whether it goes to the wife. It goes to the estate eventually. So I can see how in that example it definitely won't be included in the accrual calculation. What that means for the living annuity death benefit and whether that should be taken into account or not, I'm not sure. I'll have to think about it a bit. Good point.
There's actually a question over there. Could you pass the mic to him, please? Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks, Eddie. Very interesting. My name is Charles. I think, some very good points. I mean, obviously, starting with the intention, when you get married, the intention is not to get divorced. But it does happen, and it has happened to me, and obviously it is just a shitty process all around. I think simplicity is called for, I mean, you could hide assets in stamps, in wine, in art, in any other form, perhaps, if you wanted to. I think that for me, the thing is, there's going to be a disconnect if you allow for tax on these benefits, but not on any of the other benefits. So there might be shares, there might be a house, there might be various other assets in the estate at that time. And in my experience, you don't have or you don't care about the starting values of all those things. So your accrued capital gains tax in a share portfolio or on your family house or on anything, that's not taken into account. So I still contend market value on everything is the simplest, and I think the example here from the left was, if he did put it into a life annuity, then obviously you would have to value the right to that stream perhaps as part of the estate at that time. So that introduces that complexity, but I don't think we need that complexity on a living annuity, despite the fact what that case might have said. I think that might be a flaw in the understanding of the legal system, and not necessarily something we should then do.
Thanks, Charles. Point taken. I think I just think back to the Act, the Matrimonial Property Act, where it says in the accrual the net estate needs to be taken into account, and that means tax needs to be taken into account. So whether that happens in practice or not is one thing. I guess the question to us is, what is the right thing to do?
I understood net to be net expenses after net accrual expenses. Taxes.
Well, in this recent judgment, it's clear that it also refers to tax. So I do think it refers to tax when it talks about net.
Cool, just a final comment here.
So I guess relating to these last 2 points, Amelia, I mean, so perhaps if we're talking about intention now, the original intention for saving for your retirement money is to provide income in retirement, and then obviously you have the ability to distinguish how that capital is going to be distributed. So if you buy a life annuity, you take the whole amount and you buy the annuity. If you're putting it into a living annuity, you're using it the entire capital amount to then bifurcate between an income and a death benefit. But I mean, it's now a choice, but it all relates to a choice about the income stream. So your expected income in retirement. So even though, so the deferral, I mean, there are a few points have been made about that part that you don't take as income is actually just deferred for something else. And I know that it materializes as a death benefit, but perhaps a way to think about it is just that it's just a different form of, like, it's the present value of some other future income stream that should be considered in terms of a cap. Because I mean, simplistically, the capital amount, it seems there's a lot of thinking to try and support that actually it should just be the capital. It's the capital amount, and it deals with the question around separation of death and income benefit, because you can say, well, actually, under this system, the retirement money, it's not separated as income and death. It's income in a different form. To your point about the life insurance lump sum, which is a completely different policy. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit now, so thanks.
It's fine. Maybe I'll respond with the questions. So if you were in that example and you had 5 million living annuity and 5 million in cash, the living annuity can't be split. So if you then take the 5 million as capital, would you give 5 million in cash to your spouse and keep the living annuity?
I think we need to finish on that point.
I haven't thought about it. Fortunately, I haven't had I'm not in the position yet to consider the divorce situation, but I may now on the plane back to Cape Town. So thank you.
And I think we need to finish on that. Thank you very much.
I guess that's the point. Is they're not equal in value. They're not equal in value. So I won't take that, definitely. I would give 4 million or whatever. And that's the whole point. It's not equal. Thank you.
At the moment, it's the IACA Consulting Actuaries refreshment break, which goes until 10:20. The presidential plenary has also been moved to 10:20, so there's been some motions here. So I'll see you in the main plenary for that. And yeah, there's the finals of the chess tournament happening right now. And yeah, there's 10,000 Rand prize there. And yeah, please just keep checking the app for all of the updates. Thanks, guys.